definitely data is something that businesses should think carefully about. I think there's different countries now enforcing different data protection laws. So we've seen that in South Africa, we've seen that in Rwanda, Kenya. So new data laws coming into force where which dictate how you collect customer data, how you store customer data, and most importantly, how you give customers access to the data and give them the right to be forgotten. So let's say you go and purchase something from a supermarket, you're traveling to Kampala, and you're leaving Uganda. You don't need to be in Uganda. You can actually ask the supermarket to forget you, and they will basically anonymize, so they no longer know who you are. And you can see how that extends to any range of services. So let's say you're in the healthcare field in particular, for example, where you don't want, let's say you need to buy some medicine from a pharmacy, but you don't want them to store your data. So how do you order from that pharmacy online, but then make sure that once you're done with the transaction, they can actually forget you? So that's becoming more and more of the rule as opposed to the exception. It's going to take some time because technologically it's not easy to implement. The way databases are organized today, all the data is scattered all over the place. And actually at Africa's Talking, we do have a solution where you can centralize all the customer data, and that we're going to be launching that later this year. So something that allows you, even as you're engaging your customers, whether it's SMS, USSD, on the app, on the web, you can basically pull their entire history. And then the customer can decide what do they want to do with that data. They can export that data and let's say use it in another service. They can delete that data. They can select which data they want to be deleted, and so on and so forth. So just creating pathways to give the customer full control over how their data is collected and used by the business. But it's definitely something that we will need to be very careful about. But ultimately, it's just how do you enforce these rules so that the government is able to see who is actually taking advantage of. I have 100,000 phone numbers that I know are valid of Nigerians, and I'm how do I not start spamming them and getting them to hear about services they don't really care about? They've not opted into this kind of service. I think it's a work in progress, and I think there's different things telcos are doing. For example, so separating marketing SMSs from transactional SMSs. So these SMSs, for example, if the bank is sending you an OTP, you definitely want to get that message. But if the bank is telling you, "Hey, we have a new loan," then maybe you want to opt into that. You don't want that to be forced onto your phone. So creating those kinds of separate binds and then having different incentives. So maybe the marketing SMS could be more expensive than the transactional SMS. I think in Nigeria it's kind of the opposite, but I feel like if they use that, or like having, the marketing bind can only be used between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. or those kinds of rules that just start to clean up the general flow of information, and then customers feel like their data is being protected. But for me, the ultimate, and this is where Web3 and all these platforms are taking us, is where the customer has full control over the information, and they can just log in and see, this is the data you have on me, and you have the option to say, you know what, forget me, and that data is immediately deleted. I think for me, in terms of pricing, it's how do telcos work with businesses so that we find a price point that actually works for them, so that they can actually embed these services into their applications. We've seen cases where the cost of an SMS, for example, is 15 naira. So a business is definitely not going to use that channel to engage customers because the cost is too high. We've been fighting to get the cost to be less than a naira, so get it into the kobo range, because I think in the kobo range, then businesses can actually start to see this as a viable option of engaging customers. Same thing with USSD, where in Nigeria, for example, the cost of a 20-second USSD session is about 4 naira. And that's just 20 seconds. So imagine a customer going through different menus. By the time they're done with that session, the cost is extremely high. So that also lowers the effectiveness of those channels. Of course, there's new channels like WhatsApp, which charge you based on a 24-hour window. And I think in Nigeria, that cost is about maybe 15, 20 naira. I could be wrong. It might be higher than that. And that probably is more likely to be used by businesses, but then you're leaving out customers that don't have smartphones, that don't have data. So that starts to be an option, but how do we bring down these costs? Because ultimately for me, the value really is in the relationship and the trust you build with the customer. Whether you're an SME, whether you're the telco, whether you're a large enterprise, that relationship, that trust that you build by having timely, effective communication that is always on, you can't replace that value, and you can't put a price tag on that value. And that customer will then consume more services from your service if they actually build that trust. So we've seen companies in Kenya that scale to millions of homes providing clean energy solutions just because of the way they were very, very effective in using SMS. To this day, they don't have an app. So you can engage millions of customers without really having to get them to get smartphones and, get into this whole other world of, you need data, you need a smartphone, and so on and so forth. And then now pricing, I think, mentioning how pricing will affect the cleanliness of the communication, because yes, if you lower the prices dramatically, then everyone will start sending SMSs. But then in tandem with that, then you regulate who actually sends messages. So you have things like sender IDs, which are, which identify the business that's sending the message. You can slowly build trust with the business, and then you can separate the transactional messages from the marketing messages and price them differently. So just create incentives for businesses to behave correctly once they have access to these channels. And then make sure there is opt-out instructions with every message that's being sent, so that a customer can know, if I'm not interested in this service, how can I actually opt out of these messages? So for me, and we've seen aspects of this in different markets. I think in Kenya, we've seen, of course, on the pricing side, on the, just separating traffic. I think Kenya has actually done pretty well on both SMS and USSD. But I see a lot of potential, for example, in Nigeria, where the pricing is still quite far from where it needs to be. And I think pricing is usually the first driver in making sure that more and more businesses are able to consume these services. So I think that's where we think some of these telcos should be focusing on in terms of driving uptake of these services.